Welcome to How to Homeschool Radio, the show where we help new and veteran homeschoolers create a successful homeschool that works for their families. Whether you're thinking about homeschooling, just started homeschooling, or have been homeschooling for years, you've come to the right place. I'm your host, Judy Sardin, homeschooling coach, homeschooling mom of two, and author of Sardin's Practical Guide, How to Start Homeschooling. Are you ready? Let's get to it. Today I'm going to talk to you about book lists. To book list or to not book list. And when I say book list, I know when kids are in school, they maybe have a book list that they get over the course of the summer that they can choose from. They can choose what to read from that book list. Or if they have even an English course, they may have a list of books that they have to read. And so a lot of times in our homeschooling situations, we may want to try to recreate that sort of thing in our homeschool. And so the question is, do you book list or do you not? So I know a lot of people who like to do the book list because they want to make sure their kids are reading the right books. And especially if you think that your kid is going to go to high school, public high school or brick and mortar high school, people want to make sure that their kids have read the right books, that they are reading the right books so that they can get the proper literary analyses and things like that. And then there are other people, like myself, who say, book list, yeah, no thanks. So which one is right? And I'm going to submit that either one is okay. Let's talk about why you want a book list. Well, first and foremost, book lists really, if you have a book of, these are the books your kids should be familiar with by the time they reach 8th grade, that can really serve as a safety net, if you will. I know if I'm going to have to send my kid to high school, that they will have read the right books. They'll be familiar with literary references. I mean, that's one of the good things about using a book list, that your kid can be familiar with. Just there are a lot of literary references in pop culture. And so if your child has read the right books, then they won't be lost when references are made to certain literature. However, say you decide that you don't want to do a book list. Say you want to let your kid read whatever they want to read. Then, what do they do about the literary analyses that they will have had to have done before they get to high school? What will they do about the lack of literary knowledge? And so, which one do you do? So I personally choose not to do a book list. There are lots of good reasons to do a book list. Like I've already mentioned, they understand literary references. They have read the right books by the time they get to high school. It's a safety net to make sure that your kid knows this body of literature that everybody should know. I personally don't do book lists, and I have a couple of reasons why. First off, I'm African American, my children are African American, and most of the books on those book lists do not have characters that look like me or my children. In fact, some book lists have no books that have characters that look like me and my children. And in large part, that's not a problem as they get older because there are not pictures in the book. But during the times when they're younger and there are pictures in the books, that is a problem because nobody looks like them. They can't really relate to the characters the way you really want them to because nobody looks like them. The other thing is, whenever there are books that include people that look like them, they typically happen during the time when Africans were enslaved in the United States. I don't want them reading slave books about people who look like them when they're little. Or they're during Jim Crow or the Depression. And so basically most of the literature, or they have really bad slang, which drives me crazy. And so most of the literature that contains characters that look like me and my children, I deem unacceptable. So if I do find a reading list that has Black characters in it, has books about Black characters in it, those books are still not books that I want to read to my kids. What do I want to read to my kids? I want my kids to be able to read books if they have brown characters in them. Just brown people doing stuff that kids do. No slang. It'd be great if the parents are married. It seems like most of the literature, especially modern literature, with black characters, the parents are divorced, separated, whatever. There's always some family. They're usually with a single parent. And so I don't like that. So for me, I'm very picky about the type of literature that my kids read. And I do want them to read diverse literature. Like, for example, in most reading lists, you'll find Tom Sawyer. Well, I don't want my kids to read Tom Sawyer. Tom Sawyer has some brown characters in it for sure. But I don't want that to be the only, those brown characters to be the only brown characters that they encounter when they're reading literature. So what I do is I screen literature very carefully. I'm really big on, when I was doing read alouds, I'm really big on, if they're describing some person that's so beautiful because of their blonde ringlets and their blue eyes, I will sit there and edit real time to brown curly hair and beautiful brown eyes. I will do that real time while I'm reading. I will edit as I go along so that in their mind's eye, the characters look like them. But they can't do that when they're reading the books on their own. So they're now at an age where they're reading books on their own. And so I don't do reading lists. What I do instead is I allow them to read books that they find interesting. And often my daughter will look for books that have brown characters on the cover because she wants to read stuff about people who look like her. And so that's one of the reasons why I don't do reading lists. And then another reason is I have a reluctant reader. My son was a reluctant reader, and it just got to the point where it was super, I could do read alouds, but if I wanted him to read something himself, I really needed to find something that he was interested in. And, I didn't allow him to read Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Captain in Underpants, and inane stuff like that. But what I would do is allow him to choose his own book. So he likes series. He read some of the Harry Potter. He read the Wings of Fire series, which is about dragons. It's fantasy. The reading level is acceptable. And with him, as he's getting older, he's in middle school, I will have him from time to time read, after one or two books that he chose on his own, I will have him read a schooly type book. So I do insert some of those required books after I've screened it appropriately. And then that way he's still able to read the kinds of books he wants with characters that look the way he wants them to look, whether they look like dragons or whatever. And he's still getting kind of that proper, and I'm saying that with air quotes, the proper literature background where he is reading kind of the heavier, more difficult texts that he'll need to be able to read when he gets to high school. So that's how I approach it, and I plan on approaching it that way when he gets to high school as well, because we will probably continue to do literature at home, although I do outsource a few of his courses. But for those two reasons, I don't do book lists, and because I want them to be able to read characters that look like them and who have all these other qualifications that I described, and also because I have a reluctant reader who really just needs to be able to read on grade level or above grade level the stuff that he wants to read. That is how we went from having a reluctant reader who really didn't want to read anything to now who will pick up a book on his own and read it on his own and know enough about it to be able to tell me about it. That's how we went from a reluctant reader to a reader. Now he still doesn't love reading, but he will read, and he does read on his own without me having to ask him outside of the required book that he's having to read for school. So that's why I don't do book lists. But if you or somebody who likes to know for sure that you've checked all your boxes, if you're someone who really does need the guidance to know what your kid needs to be reading or should be reading, book lists are great. There's so many different book lists out there. You can look at book lists that cover only English literature or only American literature. So there are a number of book lists out there that you can choose from depending on where you are. I am going to suggest for everybody that you look for book lists that are diverse, because this is a diverse world where we live. And I would also encourage you, when you're looking at the diverse books, to look at books that don't just have races that are non-European as always the underdog, because that gets old. And also, that's just not how real life is. And nobody needs, whether you are brown, you don't need to only be reading about yourself as the underdog. And if you're not brown, you don't need to be reading about brown people as always the underdog. It kind of goes both ways. So I encourage you to be critical about the reading list that you are using. If you are using a reading list, to do look for diversity. Do look for different types of characters in different settings, because that's important for all children to read about different people in different settings. And so that's kind of my encouragement. So to use a reading list or not to use a reading list, it's really up to you. It really depends on where you are in your homeschooling journey, where you are in your personal journey and your personal quest to, seek out diversity, seek out other voices. And so that it's all depending on you, but I'm going to just say none of it is wrong. It's just where we all are. And I think the bottom line is to make sure your kids are reading. And that's really that at the end of the day, to have your child reading is most important. And if you are wanting to instill a love of reading in your children, you just have to think, if every single book that they read is required reading, are they going to develop a love of reading that way? Or if every single book that they get to read is only one that they want, are they going to be prepared for higher level literature and higher level literary analysis? And just remember, you can do literary analyses of pretty much any book they read. You can do characters have to be developed in any kind of book. You can have the same types of literary analyses in any well-written book. It doesn't have to be a classic. It doesn't have to be one that's on the list. So just because it's not on the list doesn't mean that they can't do all the writing and all the stuff that they need to do. But, if they are reading exclusively stuff that they want to read, you just have to make sure it's quality material that they are reading. And that's kind of my baseline, even when my son chooses his own books. So, and my daughter chooses her own books as well. But, so you can do something in between. So you can do all book list, you can do all discretionary reading, or you can do a mixture of both. And I say it so many times, that's the beauty of homeschooling. You have the flexibility to do what is best for your child, and most importantly, what's best for you, the home educator, because if it's not working for you, then you're not going to be able to get it to work for your kids. So let me know what you think. Let me know if you're using a list, if you're not, and what you think, why you think the benefit of doing it your way is great, because any feedback that I get from you guys will only help other parents who are trying to figure it out. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.
Hey, one more thing before you go. As a valued member of How to Homeschool Radio, I want to help you and hear from you not only when you're listening to the show, but all day, every day. I have a new Facebook group called How to Homeschool, and it's a place where you can get together with other homeschooling families to get support, offer support, and interact real-time to homeschooling issues that are most important to you. If you want to be a part of this growing community, see the latest videos, and get live answers to your homeschooling questions, go to judysardin.com/homeschool podcast. Or you can just hop onto Facebook and search for How to Homeschool under groups. Drop me a note to let me know when you join. I can't wait to see you there.